something begins to shift quietly. There's no dramatic collapse, no thunderclap of change, no moment that screams transformation. But beneath the surface, something starts to ache, not in the body, but in the soul. It's a fatigue not from labor, but from pretending. A deep, stubborn exhaustion from carrying an identity built to please, to fit, to avoid disappointing others. This person, like so many of us, has worn a mask so convincingly that even they began to believe it. They smiled when they wanted to, scream, said yes when every fiber whispered no. They kept explaining themselves, trying to be understood, seeking approval like oxygen. And the world, blind to their effort, applauded the performance but never saw the person behind it. But now, that mask, that persona, as Carl Jung called it, begins to crack. Not because of a dramatic event, but because the truth can't be silenced forever. The identity shaped for survival is no longer enough for the soul. A quiet tension grows. The roles they've played, the peacemaker, the achiever, the agreeable one, feel foreign, like costumes worn too long. The mirror reflects someone familiar yet unknown, and in the stillness something older, deeper begins to call. It's not loud, it's not urgent, but it's real. This is the call of the self, the true center of the psyche, not the image shown to the world, but the essence that longs to be lived. It's a whisper behind every smile that didn't reach the eyes, a longing beneath every silence that swallowed truth. And when the self whispers louder than expectations, the journey begins. Not outward, but inward. It begins in silence, in discomfort. In the question, what if I lived as myself? You begin to realize that most of your life has been lived in reaction, not creation. You dressed for approval, spoke to be liked, performed not because you were free, but because you were afraid. And it was so subtle, so normalized, that you didn't even see it as fear. You called it being kind, responsible, respectful. But underneath there was anxiety, a quiet dread of not being enough. The persona, the social mask you crafted, was efficient. It helped you survive. It helped you succeed. But it didn't help you feel whole. Because while it protected you from rejection, it also distanced you from yourself. And then the cracks start to show. You say no to something small, and for the first time, you don't justify it. You don't over-explain. You don't rush to soften the discomfort. You just say it. And even though your chest tightens, even though your mind screams you'll be punished, you survive. More than that, something in you exhales. You draw a boundary, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You stop answering texts that drain you. You start leaving conversations that insult your intuition. You turn down invitations not because you're antisocial, but because you're no longer willing to betray your inner signals. And with each of these acts, the persona weakens. Its grip loosens. There's grief here too. Because letting go of the mask means facing all the years you disappeared inside it, all the moments you said yes to avoid the risk of no, the friendships built on pleasing, the jobs pursued for praise, the relationships maintained out of fear. You see it all and it stings, but this sting is sacred. It's honest, it's alive, it marks the beginning of your return. The process doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels awkward, clumsy. You doubt yourself. You wonder if you're being selfish, difficult, cold, because you've been trained to believe that your silence meant peace, that your compliance meant love. But you're learning that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. That saying no doesn't mean shutting people out. It means letting yourself in. That being honest is not cruelty, it's clarity. You used to search faces, tone, and pauses for clues. Do they approve of me? Am I good enough? Did I say the right thing? And now something shifts. You begin to look inward, not outward. What do you feel? What do you want? And this is radical, because for so long your compass was external. You scanned the environment like radar, adjusting who you were to avoid conflict, criticism, abandonment. You were a shapeshifter, brilliant at surviving, but not at being yourself. Now the question becomes, What if survival is no longer enough? You begin to see how many choices were fear-based, how many dreams you postponed because someone might not understand, how many truths you swallowed because someone might be offended. You realize that pleasing people is a form of self-abandonment, a way of slowly editing your soul. The cracks in the persona reveal not only your pain, but your power. You're not reacting anymore. You're choosing. And that choice, at first, is terrifying. Because the world you knew was built around your ability to perform. Your relationships were shaped by the version of you that complied. So when you stop performing, the structures around you shift. Some tremble, some fall, but what remains is real. You notice that some people pull away. They don't recognize you anymore. Or worse, they're uncomfortable with your clarity. And that hurts. But it also liberates because you see that the love that required your silence was not love. The loyalty that required your self-erasure was not loyalty. You're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be whole. You'll lose some things in the process, but you'll gain yourself. And that trade, though painful, is sacred. The journey through these cracks isn't polished. It's not Instagram-worthy. It's messy, quiet, personal. But it's also luminous. Because as the persona falls, the self steps forward. Hesitant. At first, unsure of the ground, but truer than anything you've ever lived. And it all begins with a moment. One moment where you choose not to betray yourself. One honest word. One quiet no. One step back into your own energy. The cracks are not the end, they're the beginning. Something changes when you start making decisions, not out of fear, but from the core of who you are. At first, it's disorienting. You've spent a lifetime calculating reactions, measuring how every choice might be received, rehearsing the least offensive version of your truth. But now you pause and choose differently. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. You begin to say no, not to punish others, but to protect your energy. You cancel plans when your body is exhausted. You no longer force yourself to explain every boundary you set. You stop apologizing for simply being. You breathe, not to calm others, but to center yourself. And for the first time, you feel the quiet freedom of being internally anchored. This is what it means to make decisions from the soul. They're not reactive. They're not performative. They don't require an audience. They rise from stillness, from intuition, from clarity, from a place within you that doesn't beg to be validated. You stop trying to be likable. You start being real. And when you do, you feel the friction. Some people don't like your honesty. They don't understand your boundaries. They label your clarity as coldness. But this time, you don't flinch. You let them have their discomfort, without trying to rescue them from it, because now you're not shrinking to stay safe. You're expanding to stay honest. You begin to see how much of your past was dictated by an inner voice that asked, "What will they think?" That voice is quieter now. Not gone, but quieter. Because another voice is emerging. One that asks, "What do you think? What feels right to you?" That voice is the self, and you're learning to trust it. You start choosing relationships that feel nourishing, not just familiar. You stop chasing people who make you doubt your worth. You leave conversations that require you to abandon your truth to keep the peace. Your life begins to rearrange. At first, it feels like loss. The invitations stop. Certain people pull back. You feel the ache of space where noise used to be. But then something miraculous happens. Your nervous system starts to relax. The hypervigilance begins to fade. You realize you no longer need to perform to be loved. You're loving yourself in ways no one else ever could. This isn't about arrogance, it's about alignment. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to beg to be chosen. You don't need to mold yourself into who they want you to be. You simply stand in who you are, quietly, firmly, fully. And that energy changes everything. People sense it. Some lean in, curious and drawn. Others retreat, unsettled. But you no longer bend to keep them. You're not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to be honest. There's a sacred solitude in this phase. Not loneliness and solitude. You begin to enjoy your own company. Your inner world becomes rich, alive, awake. You listen more. You notice the symbols life offers. You begin to feel supported not by applause but by alignment. This is the beginning of individuation, the journey of becoming fully yourself. No longer an echo of what others expect, but a voice of your own inner truth. And that voice is fierce in its gentleness. It says, "No, I don't want to do that. Yes, this matters to me. I'm not available for that dynamic anymore. I'm allowed to change. My peace is non-negotiable. I choose myself, even if it cost me comfort." You start to feel the power of quiet decisions, the ones no one else sees. Getting up early to meditate, leaving a party when your spirit feels tired, choosing not to respond to drama, saying no without guilt, saying yes without explanation. You realize you're not seeking permission anymore, and that shift, that sacred internal shift, marks a turning point. Because when your choices come from the soul, you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop trying to be everything to everyone. You're not here to be a mirror. You're here to be a flame. And from that fire you begin to move differently, not to impress, not to prove, but to express. Every step is a declaration. I am no longer betraying myself to belong. This doesn't mean the fear disappears, the ego still whispers, the old habits still tug. But now you have something stronger, a center that holds a soul that speaks. The deeper you go into yourself, the more you realize that your need for validation wasn't about others. It was about a part of you that still felt unworthy, of existing without approval. It's here that the shadow begins to reveal itself. The shadow isn't evil. It isn't monstrous. It's simply everything you were told not to be. Everything you were told was too much, too sensitive, too intense, too selfish. The traits you disowned to survive, the emotions you buried to belong. It's the anger you swallowed, the sadness you ignored, the needs you minimized, the truths you twisted to avoid rejection. And for a long time you believed those parts were shameful, unlovable, but they were never the problem. The real problem was believing you had to amputate pieces of your soul just to be loved. Meeting the shadow is not dramatic at first, it's subtle. It begins with moments of discomfort, triggers, irritations, overreactions, things that feel irrational on the surface but carry ancient wounds underneath. Someone interrupts you and you feel invisible. Someone criticizes you and you feel like a child again. Someone leaves you on read and suddenly you question your worth. These aren't just emotions. They're echoes, memories that haven't been processed, places inside you still ruled by the past. The ego wants to avoid this. It says, "You're fine, you've moved on, don't go there." But the soul whispers, "Go back. That's where you left yourself." And so you do. You stop distracting. You stop numbing. You turn toward the discomfort, not to fix it, but to listen. And what you find isn't chaos, it's clarity. Underneath every defense is a younger version of you, still waiting to be seen, still believing they need to earn love. You begin to reparent yourself, not by lecturing, but by holding, by sitting with your own sadness without trying to make it pretty, by honoring your anger without turning it into shame, by telling yourself the words you once needed to hear, "You're not too much. You never were." This is not glamorous work. It's not easily shared on social media. It's slow, raw, intimate. But it is powerful, because every time you integrate a piece of your shadow, you reclaim energy that was frozen in time. You begin to live from your full self, not just the parts deemed acceptable, and something beautiful happens. You stop settling for crumbs, in love, in work, in friendship. You stop chasing people who need you to shrink. You stop over-explaining your worth. You start choosing what reflects your truth, not your trauma. You realize you are no longer available for emotional starvation. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. Your standards rise not because you're rigid, but because you finally see your own value. You're not begging anymore. You're building. You begin to understand that people's inability to love you had nothing to do with your worth. It had to do with their capacity. And now you stop internalizing that deficit. You stop trying to fix others so they can finally see you. You see yourself. The more you meet your shadow, the more you recognize it in others, not with judgment, but with compassion. You see their armor, their defenses, their silence, their rage, and you no longer take it personally. But you also stop abandoning yourself to rescue them. You're not responsible for their healing. You can hold space, but you don't hold their process. You begin to walk with boundaries rooted in love, not fear. This is integration. You're no longer just the light. You're also the depth. You're the desire and the wound, the clarity and the confusion. You're no longer fragmented. You're becoming whole. The shadow taught you that healing isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. And now you move with a different rhythm. You don't chase, you attract. You don't force, you allow. You don't grasp, you trust. You begin to feel a coherence between your inner world and your outer reality. A sacred mirroring, a symbolic logic. And this is where the magic begins. Not magic as fantasy, but magic as alignment. You start to notice synchronicities, the book that shows up at the right time, the conversation that confirms your intuition, the person who enters your life with a message you needed to hear. It's not coincidence, it's coherence. The shadow makes you honest. You stop pretending to be fine when you're not. You stop smiling when your soul is grieving. You stop hiding your intensity to make others comfortable. You start telling the truth, not just to others, but to yourself. You realize that your darkness is not dangerous. It's misunderstood. Your anger has wisdom. Your grief has depth. Your fear has roots. When you meet these emotions with presence, they transform. They become guides, not enemies. And something shifts in your nervous system. You're not bracing all the time. You're not performing calm while you drown inside. You become congruent. And with that congruence comes peace, a peace that isn't the absence of pain, but the presence of integrity. You start trusting your emotional body the way you once trusted outside approval. You start asking, what is this feeling trying to teach me? What am I defending against? What do I need to grieve so I can grow? You become curious about your contractions, not ashamed of them. And through that curiosity, you uncover the most radical truth. You are not broken. You are becoming whole, and that wholeness is magnetic, not because it attracts everything you want, but because it repels everything you no longer need. The shadow isn't something to conquer. It's something to reclaim. Something settles. Not because everything is resolved, but because something within you is finally being heard. You're no longer waging war against yourself. The inner conflict that once screamed between what you felt and what you showed has quieted. Not disappeared, but softened. This is the stage of integration, where what was once split apart, the self and the shadow, the truth and the mask, begins to reunite. You no longer deny the parts of you that were inconvenient. The anger, the longing, the needs. You hold them, you listen, you allow them. A seat at the table, not because they dictate your life, but because they are part of your wholeness. Your relationship with your unconscious begins to shift. Before, it was a stranger, a threat, a realm of dreams and symbols you didn't know how to interpret. But now it's a language, a mirror, a guide. You pay attention to the sensations in your body. You take seriously the images that arise in your dreams. You stop brushing off your intuition as irrational. You begin to trust the voice that doesn't shout, but knows. And something miraculous happens. The urgency fades. You no longer feel desperate to be seen, understood, or validated. You no longer chase applause to feel alive. You begin to experience a deep satisfaction in simply being congruent. When your inner world and outer actions align, you find peace. You stop searching for someone to complete you, not because you've given up on love, but because you've remembered that you are not half of anything. You are not missing. You are not a puzzle to be solved. And the more you embody this truth, the more magnetic you become, not in the performative sense, but in the energetic one. People begin to feel your presence, your stillness, your depth. Without saying a word, you start to communicate. I'm here, I'm real, I'm not performing anymore. This is what wholeness feels like. It's not loud, it doesn't need to be. It's a quiet confidence, not built on ego, but on integration. You're not trying to be anything, you just are. And that is enough. You begin to organize your life around your energy, not your obligations. You choose rest over resentment, truth over tradition, intuition over instruction. You begin to understand that your nervous system is more trustworthy than anyone's advice. You move slower, but with more precision. You speak less, but with more weight. You stop needing to be right and start needing to be honest. And here, in this space, your boundaries transform. They're no longer fences made of fear, but invitations shaped by clarity. You're not keeping people out, you're keeping yourself intact. You're no longer afraid to disappoint others because you've stopped disappointing yourself. This is the gift of integration. A life where you are no longer reacting but creating, no longer fighting for love, but embodying it. No longer chasing purpose, but living from it. You understand now that your value isn't conditional. It doesn't rise or fall based on productivity, popularity, or perception. It's intrinsic, eternal. Already here, and from this space, you begin to serve, not from exhaustion but from overflow. Not to prove your worth but to share your essence. You give without attachment. You receive without guilt. You stop measuring your growth by how much you produce, and start measuring it by how much peace you carry. You don't need your days to be impressive. You need them to be aligned. You begin to appreciate the ordinary moments. A deep breath, a meaningful gaze, the sound of your own laughter, real, unforced, free. You realize that the extraordinary has always been hiding inside the ordinary. You begin to welcome stillness, not as a void, but as a temple. You no longer fear solitude because now it is filled with presence, with awareness, with you. You no longer chase signs from the universe because now you carry the signal within. You become the source of what you once begged life to give you, and when the world doesn't understand, when others ask why you've changed, you don't scramble to explain. You smile because you know, because you've returned to yourself, and now here you are, as no longer performing, no longer hiding, no longer begging to be seen. You see yourself, you recognize the shape of your own soul, and that changes everything. When you begin to live from your center, something shifts in the way others perceive you. Even if they don't understand what's changed, your presence becomes a mirror, not a polished, flattering one, but a true mirror. One that reflects back to others what they have not yet claimed within themselves. The clarity you hold, the boundaries you protect, the alignment you embody, all of it becomes a silent challenge to the personas around you. Some will feel inspired, drawn to you. They'll say things like, "You make me feel safe," or "You remind me of something I forgot." These are the ones whose souls recognize yours, who are ready or almost ready to begin their own return. Others will feel exposed, uncomfortable, even threatened. They may call you distant, cold, arrogant, not because you are, but because your wholeness confronts their fragmentation. Your self-possession disrupts their need for control. Your truth reminds them of everything they've silenced. You become a disruptor, not through conflict but through coherence. Your alignment acts like a frequency. Those who resonate will rise toward it. Those who are not ready will resist it. But you no longer soften your edges to make others more comfortable. You no longer apologize for your clarity. You no longer dim your light so others don't feel blind. Because you've learned, it's not your job to make your truth digestible. You hold space now, not by fixing but by being, not by rescuing but by witnessing. You let others be uncomfortable, confused, triggered, and you let yourself stay rooted in who you are. You allow their projections to pass through you, like wind through an open window, because you've built something inside that doesn't collapse at the first sign of judgment. And here's the paradox. The more whole you become, the more you invite others into their own wholeness, not by convincing them. Just by being yourself, you've become medicine for those who are ready, and a mirror for those who are not. Some people will come closer, not because you chase them, but because they feel something in your presence that awakens a part of themselves. They may not be able to name it, but they'll feel it, an invitation to meet themselves more honestly. Others will retreat, not because you've done anything wrong, but because their masks don't hold up in the light of your authenticity, and that's okay. You let them go without resentment, because your worth is no longer tied to being understood. You're not here to make everyone like you. You're here to be a portal, a doorway into deeper truth, and sometimes that truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes that truth brings endings. Sometimes that truth rearranges the room. But now, You can hold it. You can hold the silence after you speak. You can hold the disapproval. You can hold the space between losing old connections and forming new ones. And in that space, something grows, a deeper trust in life. A trust that the people meant for you will not need you to shrink. That what you lose in false safety, you gain in real alignment. Your job is no longer to protect others from their own growth. Your job is to stay honest, to stay open, to stay whole, and let your presence do the rest. When you begin to live from your center, something shifts in the way others perceive you, even if they don't understand what's changed. Your presence becomes a mirror, not a polished, flattering one, but a true mirror, one that reflects back to others what they have not yet claimed within themselves. The clarity you hold, the boundaries you protect, the alignment you embody, all of it becomes a silent challenge to the personas around you. Some will feel inspired, drawn to you. They'll say things like, "You make me feel safe," or "You remind me of something I forgot." These are the ones whose souls recognize yours, who are ready or almost ready to begin their own return. Others will feel exposed, uncomfortable, even threatened. They may call you distant, cold, arrogant, not because you are, but because your wholeness confronts their fragmentation. Your self-possession disrupts their need for control. Your truth reminds them of everything they've silenced. You become a disruptor, not through conflict, but through coherence. Your alignment acts like a frequency. Those who resonate will rise toward it. Those who are not ready will resist. But you no longer soften your edges to make others more comfortable. You no longer apologize for your clarity. You no longer dim your light so others don't feel blind, because you've learned. It's not your job to make your truth digestible. You hold space now, not by fixing, but by being. Not by rescuing, but by witnessing. You let others be uncomfortable, confused, triggered, and you let yourself stay rooted in who you are. You allow their projections to pass through you, like wind through an open window. Because you've built something inside that doesn't collapse at the first sign of judgment. And here's the paradox. The more whole you become, the more you invite others into their own wholeness, not by convincing them. Just by being yourself, you've become medicine for those who are ready, and a mirror for those who are not. Some people will come closer, not because you chase them, but because they feel something in your presence that awakens a part of themselves. They may not be able to name it, but they'll feel it. An invitation to meet themselves more honestly. Others will retreat, not because you've done anything wrong, but because their masks don't hold up in the light of your authenticity. And that's okay. You let them go without resentment, because your worth is no longer tied to being understood. You're not here to make everyone like you. You're here to be a portal, a doorway into deeper truth. And sometimes that truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes that truth brings endings. Sometimes that truth rearranges the room. But now you can hold it. You can hold the silence after you speak. You can hold the disapproval. You can hold the space between losing old connections and forming new ones. And in that space something grows, a deeper trust in life. A trust that the people meant for you will not need you to shrink. That what you lose in false safety, you gain in real alignment. You realize that your authenticity is not a strategy, it's a vibration. And that vibration will attract and repel with equal honesty. Your job is no longer to protect others from their own growth. Your job is to stay honest, to stay open, to stay whole, and let your presence do the rest. There comes a point in the journey where silence becomes necessary, not as avoidance but as communion. You withdraw, not from life but from the noise that once shaped your identity. It's not rejection, it's reverence. You're no longer trying to keep up with the world's pace because your soul has a different rhythm now. This is sacred. Solitude. You stop looking for mirrors in others and begin to see your reflection in stillness, in trees, in sky, in the way light moves across a room. You learn to sit with yourself, not because there's nothing else to do, but because there's nowhere more important to be. At first, the quiet can feel unbearable. You're used to distraction, stimulation, validation. Without it, you confront the parts of you still waiting to be acknowledged. The echoes of old roles, the habits of self-abandonment, the internalized expectations that still whisper from the past. But you stay, and in staying, something opens. You begin to dream again, not just at night but during the day. Symbols arise, images return. You feel something ancient stirring inside you, like roots growing downward, not outward. You begin to write or paint or walk for hours without needing to explain why. Your movements are slower, but more intentional. You're no longer acting from habit. You're listening, and what you hear isn't always words. Sometimes it's a feeling, a memory, a longing. The unconscious becomes your companion, and instead of fearing what it might reveal, you start to welcome its presence. You let the symbols speak. You trust the language of the body. You give space to what used to be silenced. This solitude becomes fertile, a sanctuary, not a prison. You begin to sense the sacredness in what's simple: cooking a quiet meal, cleaning a space with devotion, lighting a candle just for yourself. You realize that presence doesn't require an audience, and beauty doesn't need to be validated to be real. Your connection to the external world softens. You're less reactive, less inclined to prove. The silence has recalibrated something. You no longer seek meaning in constant motion. You find it in depth, in the moment, in breath. And in this quiet, your soul begins to reorganize. What once felt urgent no longer pulls at you. The timelines you used to chase dissolve. You no longer measure your worth by productivity or proximity to others. You measure it by how honestly you live with yourself. You remember who you were before the world told you who to be, and in that remembrance something sacred returns, the voice within. The voice that was always there, beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the fear. The voice of the self. You begin to trust your solitude as a source of strength, not a symptom of failure. You stop interpreting quiet as emptiness. You see it as fullness, a fullness that cannot be filled by anyone else but you. In this solitude you are not lonely. You are with your essence, and that essence begins to guide you, gently, steadily, clearly. You no longer need constant input. You no longer crave distraction. You have found company in yourself, and perhaps for the first time that is enough. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to feel at home. After all the inner work, the solitude, the shedding, something begins to shift. Not just within, but around you. The world, once chaotic and random, starts to feel strangely coherent. Events that used to feel disconnected begin to form a thread. You notice patterns, you recognize timing. The right book appears. The needed conversation unfolds. The person you were ready for enters your path. Not because you forced it, but because you matched it. This is synchronicity, not magic, not coincidence, but symbolic coherence. When the outer world begins to reflect your inner transformation, it's as if the universe, once a foreign force, now speaks your language. Life becomes symbolic, not literal. You begin to read it like a poem, not a manual. You no longer feel like life is happening to you. You begin to feel life responding to you. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy. Challenges still arise, losses still come. But you meet them differently, with less panic, more presence. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? You ask, what is this showing me? You've stopped trying to control outcomes. You've started aligning with essence. And in that alignment, you become magnetic, not to what you want, but to what resonates with who you are. You stop chasing. You start attracting, and what you attract mirrors your integration. You find yourself surrounded by people who don't need you to translate your truth. They just understand. You enter spaces that don't require performance. You meet situations that test your growth, used not to punish but to deepen. And each time you rise, not because you're stronger but because you're truer. Your life becomes art. Even the mundane becomes rich with meaning. The coffee cup you choose in the morning, the stranger who locks eyes with you, the detour that takes you somewhere unexpected but necessary. Everything begins to hum with a subtle intelligence. You start to feel connected to something larger than yourself, not in a grand, abstract way, but in the quiet detail of daily life. You understand that nothing is random. Everything is part of the unfolding. The more integrated you become, the less you seek, because what you were seeking was never outside of you. It was the return to wholeness. Now you live it. You're not performing peace. You're experiencing it. You're not preaching alignment, you're embodying it. Your inner reality is no longer split from your outer expression. They move as one. You speak with fewer words, but more impact. You move with less effort, but more presence. You create not for recognition, but from overflow. You don't need to prove that you've healed. Your life does it for you, and there's a freedom here. A calm because you're no longer running, no longer grasping, no longer trying to become someone you've already become. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. You no longer need to be heard to feel worthy. You've made peace with your own presence, and from that place the world begins to mirror back something extraordinary. Resonance, connection, purpose. Not because you demanded it, but because you aligned with it. And in this symbolic coherence, life feels like it finally makes sense, not because you figured it out, but because you finally remembered who you are. And when that happens, when the soul comes home, something ancient is restored. Belonging not to a group or label, but to yourself, to the earth, to the present moment. You no longer walk as a seeker, you walk as one who has arrived. And in that arrival, the universe stops being a stranger. It becomes a response.